I'm Chelsea Watts, Associate Professor of Humanities and Social Science here at the CF Citrus campus. Last spring, I decided that I wanted my American history students to do history. And each morning on what is a pretty long drive to work, I thought about how I could turn them into amateur historians through a project that would enrich the topics discussed in our class. One morning, as I was racking my brain, I happened to glance over and see a sign that designated Citrus County as a Purple Heart County. I had an epiphany. My students could record oral histories of local veterans. This would enrich their knowledge of modern American history while also helping them learn about heroes living right in their own community. I'm very proud of all of our students who have worked hard semester over semester for the past year to honor our local veterans through their engagement with this project. And though my students work to interview and record local veterans, students across multiple disciplines have been involved in the various components of this reception and display. I'm happy to introduce two of my dedicated colleagues, Melissa Alling and Denise Pasquale, who enthusiastically agreed to have their students work on developing the recorded interviews into written biographies and commemorative speeches. So I'm going to have Professor Alling come up. She's going to
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. Thank you Chelsea for putting this together, for hosting it and organizing it. I like when my students write very meaningful essays, and I felt this was a meaningful project. I have a lot of patriotism in my heart. When I was young, I wrote about veterans too, and have had some veterans in my family and some friends and things like that, and I just wanted my students to have meaningful writing assignments, and so I was very happy to be on board. So thank you, Chelsea, for organizing this and giving my students an outlet for writing these kinds of essays. But I'd like to thank the veterans and the loved ones who are here today. Thank you very much for coming and hearing us. We really do appreciate your service to the United States, and we really do thank you that you're here in Citrus County. And also, I hope you'll understand that this was a challenging project, and I hope we did your stories justice on the posters. And to the composition students who wrote the essays, my students, thank you so much for taking on the challenge and writing. They really did take a good interest in this, and they had a lot of respect for history and these veterans' stories. And I was very pleased to see them start to appreciate their history and the military a little bit more. Thank you. And now Denise Pasquale.
Well, good afternoon, CF. Everybody's looking bright and beautiful today. As was stated, a lot of disciplines were involved in this, and I was asked to get some of my speech students to participate. And lucky enough, I had some very willing individuals who stepped up to the plate to help us honor our Citrus County vets. Personally, this event is kind of moving for me as well. Of course, I have veterans in my family from way back. I know my grandfather was in Korea, and I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War, and watching it on television was especially moving. Today we have 4 students to speak for you. First we'll hear from Amanda Rockefeller, who is going to read a letter that was sent home from the battlefield in Vietnam. We have Jesse Powanitz, who's going to read and dedicate a poem. Casey Kearse is going to give a tribute to one of our vets who hopefully is here, James Baumstark. Is he here? And then Christina Danew is going to give a tribute to her own grandfather. So without further ado, I'm going to let my students take it from here. And Amanda, if you would.
So what I'm about to read for you today is dedicated to Janine Bokina Christie, who was...
Hard to hear you.
Sorry about that. So,
Thank you.
who, through the American Red Cross, gave emotional support to the battered soldiers of the Vietnam War. This was also dedicated to Fred Oberst as well, who is a Vietnam War veteran. Dear Daryl, you asked about Vietnam, so I'll tell you. I love it. I'm really happy over here. The work is hard and all the time, but it keeps me on my toes. The men are grossly wonderful and fully appreciate a round eye in their midst. Several times a week, we visit the hospitals and either chat with troops or program them, depending on their condition. This is one of the most disheartening, yet moral boosting jobs for me. This past Monday, we went to the big Navy hospital, and it was a sight to see. Some of the guys had just been moved from the intensive care ward prior to being moved within the hour. We see fellows with their arms and legs blown off, their heads smashed in and pieced together, eyes lost and hearts completely broken. Surprisingly enough, without sounding like Clara Barton, the biggest lift we can give them is a human female hand and some cheering words. You know that they feel like hell and then some, but it's American, a real, live, walking and talking girl. It's amazing to see them perk up, and from some, it's a feeble attempt to move an arm or even talk. Monday, I chatted for almost 10 minutes with a kid who had his intestines laying in a bag next to him. So many tubes and bottles that you could hardly get close. But he was happy to see me and smiled like a normal fellow would. Another tried to talk and tell me about all the pieces of shrapnel in him when he started to cough up blood and mucus through his larynx too. He tried, and after they cleaned him up, I went back and talked to him a little longer. Another was a revolving bed. This kid was so proud to be alive that he showed me all the wonderful wounds. There's nothing like a pieced together leg. He felt so pleased with the American Red Cross and asked just one favor: back issues of Stars and Stripes so he could find out if any of his unit or buddies were still alive. But one that really pleased me was a fellow I almost passed right by because he looked so completely out of it. He was laying with many bandages and his extremities all pieced together, his face all covered with gauze and a towel-like cover over it all. On my way out, they took the towel and gauze off. I could see why they had it on. He was just one big mess of mush. His whole head was taped up. He had stitches all over, shrapnel all over, and tubes coming out of his nose and mouth. Along with all the mess, he had scabs and gooey crusts left from the drainage. The only thing he could see was out of his right eye, but that was all he needed. Apparently, his mouth had been shattered along with everything else, because when he started to talk to you, you could see how much damage had been done. Aside from the blood, guts, and gore, he was alive, and when I teased him about his peephole and looked at him square in the face, he responded so beautifully that I wanted to hug him. He had gained enough of his senses to know who he was talking to and where he was and what condition he was in. I spent over 15 minutes with him and even got him to give a feeble yet painful laugh. It is men like that that make it all worthwhile. I would visit and talk with them every day if I could, and yet we're not in the business of getting sympathy, but just honest, straight American girl talk. We have to treat them as if nothing were wrong at all. Nothing at all.
Hello, hello. Everybody can hear me? All right. Raise this up a little bit. All right, first off, I'd like to stop and thank you all for being here today. And for those that serve, thank you for your service. I know that you might not hear it a lot, or you might not hear it enough, or you might hear it too often. But I personally have lost family to war, and I know the sacrifices you all make, so thank you. Today I'm going to talk to you about a man I got to know who knows nothing about me until about 2 seconds ago. I listened to an interview, and I listened to actually all the interviews. I'm going to go off script a little bit. I listened to all of it. Every single one of you men and women are freaking bad to the bone. Oh my goodness, you guys have done some things that are ridiculous. But anyway, so the person I chose, his name was John McGee. And the first thing I noticed about him was his accent. He goes, I'm from Boston, raised in the streets of Boston. And I was like, all right, this guy's pretty tough. And he said one thing that was pretty funny. He says, he said, I had 4 choices growing up. I become a priest, a cop, a gangster, or join the military. And I don't think he felt like a saint at the time, so he didn't become a priest. And they also had bigger guns in the military. So he enlisted 10 days after his graduation into the Army and joined the 75th Ranger Division, also known today as the Army Rangers. For those of you who didn't know, the Army Rangers are pretty bad to the bone. They kick butt and take names, and they just leave. Without cursing or nothing. They're really freaking cool. But anyway, so he enlisted overseas. He arrived in Vietnam, and one thing that spoke to me was he didn't speak a lot about his battles. I don't think at all, actually. He spoke about the guys, connections you make in war, and the brothers you have for life. An interesting quote that stuck with me from him was, when in a firefight, you're not thinking about your flag, you're thinking about your brothers and getting them home. I think that speaks a lot about his character and how in war, unbreakable relationships will form. I'm going to read a poem written from one of the people who served. And I don't think it's not really a dedication as much as it is an insight into what I think the battles were like for him and for all of you that served. It's called Ambush. One night we wandered far and long to kill young men who, brave and strong and precious to their loved, their own, were coming to kill us. Aching, filthy, weak, afraid, creeping through the dripping shades, searching forms through jungle haze, we stalked those men as prey. A stinging, steaming, humming hell tried our flesh and pride and will, but we walked and watched and waited until we froze and saw them coming. Quietly picking their way along, far from their loved ones, far from home, they seemed to be dreaming. One muttered a song, and they carried their weapons slack. I fired first. The shattering blast unleashed a deafening force that smashed and ripped and shook and seemed to last till the very earth was torn. Then silently, coldly, on command, we plucked among that gory band and left with a simple wave of hand, the offal to the leeches. Now jungle covers the stench and sight of the wrecks we left behind that night, yet we too die while winning such fights from a sickness caused by slaughter. And when we next go out again at night to kill more killer men, or else be hunted to our end, will it prove the cause is ours? How can we ever know we're right, lost in this dark, primeval night? Must we kill them, as beasts must fight, until the earth is torn? That was from James McLeroy, 1967. So I think that poem really kind of captured the harshness and quickness and brutality of war. And then from then on, I'm going to talk about John McKee. When he came home, he was not welcome, I'm sure, as many of you know. In some cases, some veterans were even spat on after they came home. And personally, I think I would have gone to jail if someone spat on me after I served my country. Because I lost an uncle in Vietnam, and that sickens me. John stated also when he came home, he had a switch he couldn't flip, and sometimes he would feel cold and lifeless, and sometimes nothing at all. He didn't know it at the time, but he had signs of PTSD. Back then, it was also known as shell shock syndrome. He would get angry easily and didn't know why, and that caused many hardships in his life. But despite all this, graduated in 3 years and got the bachelor's in political science at UMass in Boston. As you can tell, he's a very driven man. He continued to help and have close relationships with the military and the veterans, all the way until 2015. He was with the Department of Defense Mission Command Integrator, specializing in integration of Army aviation aircraft for both manned and unmanned into the future Army digital networks. Within that time, he married the love of his life, Fawn McGee, and had 3 children, Mike, Eric, and Laura. I want to part with a few things that he said in his interview near the end that stuck with me, and I'm going to sum it up as best as I can. He wanted to remind everyone what a blessed life we live, to be in America and the freedoms that we have that you all fought for. I think sometimes society forgets how blessed we really are. And that if we do choose to go to war, make it quick, because we are spending our most precious resource, our youth. So again, I want to thank you all for being here and thank you for your service. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Casey Kears, and I was in the U.S. Marine Corps for 14 years. Although I'm only 17, I was a part of the military since birth because my father was a U.S. Marine Corps, in the U.S. Marine Corps. Because I've experienced many of the pressures of military life, I've always had a deep appreciation for the men and women who have served our country. This past month, I've had the privilege of learning about Captain James Baumstark of the U.S. Navy, who I'm going to honor today in this speech. Captain Baumstark attended the Naval Academy, where he graduated with a degree in engineering. He served in the Navy for 32 years, during which he commanded 2 submarines, and during that time he learned many lessons and passed on a lot of wisdom, which I've had the privilege of hearing through the interview I listened to. Captain Baumstark entered the Naval Academy in 1960. As a child, he dreamed of being a fighter pilot. And when he was a sophomore in high school, he decided to go to the Naval Academy because, as he told his father, they can teach me something no one else can. His first year in the Naval Academy was very difficult, and he said in the interview he regretted joining the Navy many times. But after that first year, when he finished with the military indoctrination system, which you go through when you first enter any armed force, he said that the Navy was a lot of hard work and reward for effort after that first year, and he was so thankful he had the chance to serve our country. While the Naval Academy was full of many challenges, it was also full of rewards for Captain Baumstark, because while he was there, he met his wife, they dated through his senior year, and eventually got married and had 6 kids and 12 grandchildren. After the Naval Academy, Captain Baumstark went on to his career. He graduated from Sub and Power School after 18 months after leaving the Naval Academy, and then moved on to his career, where he went to his first sub as a LTGG, which is the lowest officer, but he quickly moved his way through the ranks to become a captain. As a senior officer, Captain Baumstark commanded 2 submarines, an attack sub and a ballistic missile submarine. He describes one of the proudest moments of his career as when he was the captain of the attack submarine, and him and his crew were on a covert secret mission, the details of which he did not share in the interview. But in this situation, it was so tense that he said they were about 30 seconds away from crashing the sub and ending up as an international incident. The mission went for 3 hours, but after which he was drenched in sweat, but his crew had performed perfectly, and they'd gathered a lot of important information. During the first 23 years of his service in the Naval Academy, he spent a cumulative 18 years at sea, away from his family. After those first 23 years, he served 9 years in administration before retiring in 1992, with 32 years of service under his belt. Throughout his service, Baumstark says he learned many lessons, including persistence, hard work, and sticking to it. He says you should always persevere, as your hard work and efforts will be recognized, no matter how long it takes. Military life is a lot of stress, but it will teach you perseverance, and Captain Baumstark's years of service in the Navy are truly admirable, and I've been so honored to learn a fraction of information about his education, service, and the wisdom which I shared with you today. And I'd like to close my speech by asking that we give a round of applause for all the veterans in this room.
My name is Christina Dainu, and I am here today to honor my grandfather, Stacy Dainu, who is a U.S. Navy veteran. He served during the time of Vietnam, but he was never in active combat. I was very close with my grandfather growing up. He lives 2 houses away from me. I see him every morning. He's always there, and he always used to tell me crazy stories growing up. He's crazy. He had a crazy life, and I always loved hearing about him. And so when I asked him if he had any interesting or crazy stories about the military, he looked at me and said, I spent about 7 months of my life at a time at sea without seeing any land. There's not a hell of a lot to talk about. He had a fair point there. He did. But he always relates back to the military and things that he does today, and I've never seen him leave the house without a U.S. Navy veteran hat on. It can be something so little, like, I like coffee a lot, and he looks at me and he says, you know, sometimes on the ship, when I'd go to drink coffee, there would be tar clogging up the coffee pots, and it wouldn't even pour out. And he said at 3 a.m. he'd take a screw and he'd scrape out the inside just to try to get some coffee in the morning. And I always thought that was funny. And he's very important to me. We have a military background in my family. My grandfather served, his father served, his father before that served, and they all happen to be named Stacy too. I didn't know my great-grandfather well, which is Stacy Sr., but I did know that he served in World War II, and he was in active combat, but he never would tell any stories about it. He always was very quiet about it and kind of shut down the conversation. All he would ever tell us is that he peeled the potatoes, which we all know isn't true. I kind of wish my family would open up about the military more, but for some reason they have a tendency of not talking about things. So it kind of leaves me with my imagination when I think about him in the military. But I can tell that he's proud to have been able to serve the country. I can tell that it was something that he never regrets, and that it was a big part of his life and it was very important to him, which makes it important to me, and the service that you have all given to this country important to me as well.
Well, thank all of you for agreeing to speak. I know that that's a very nerve-wracking thing to get up in front of a big group of people, so we really appreciate you doing that. Let's give our speakers another round of applause. I'd like to take a moment to just recognize the work of our student writers and interviewers. They're acknowledged on the project boards and on the listening stations as you circulate around the room and look at them. My students this semester had the idea of creating these listening stations, which is really nice because you're able to hear the veterans' actual voices. So if you have not done so already, there are earbuds on the table. You're welcome to take a pair of earbuds. You don't need to touch the screens on the listening stations at all. They should just be playing on a continuous loop. You should be able to just plug right into the little audio jack and hear the recording. The recordings are between 1 minute and 3 minutes, depending on which station you're at, so you can kind of pick up that way. At the table in the back, we have blank note cards for you to thank a veteran. These cards are going to be mailed to Operation Gratitude for inclusion in care packages to servicemen and women who are currently deployed or on active duty. And so we would really love to collect as many thank you cards as possible. There's some letter writing tips on the posters on the back wall. So that if you can just maybe fill out 1 card or fill out 2 cards and drop them in the box at the end of the table, and I will make sure that those get sent to Operation Gratitude to be delivered. And so finally, I'd like to thank the people who have helped make this display and reception a possibility. First and foremost, thank you to the CF Foundation for selecting this project for funding through the Glassman New Initiative grant. Thanks also go out to Graham Young, who is full-time faculty in Visual and Performing Arts at the Ocala campus, for designing our logo and promotional materials. To the staff, administration, and of course my colleagues here at the College of Central Florida, who have graciously offered their help and support and probably watched me be completely frazzled about things and, running around like a crazy person, especially over the last couple weeks. I really appreciate working with all of you and having your support through all of this. And of course, I'd like to thank our veterans, all of whom selflessly sacrificed so much in the service of our country. Could I get the veterans that are here in the room to stand so that we can give you a round of applause? Let's thank them for their service. As a final note, we're always looking for more people to interview. There are contact cards on the large round tables and some on the back by the thank you cards. If you or someone in your family is a veteran that would be willing to participate in this project, we're hoping to continue to grow the project in the semesters that follow. So we would love to get your information. You can give it to any one of the 3 of us, and we'll make sure that we have students get in touch with you when we have the next round of interviews go out. Otherwise, grab a bite to eat, read some of our biographies, listen to some veteran voices, and enjoy the display. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.